Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me this morning, for being here on this webinar to talk about nonprofit survival in the time of COVID-19. I'm Liz Chipman, and I'm one of the consultants here at Capital CFO. I'm also an executive director of a small nonprofit in southwestern New Hampshire. And I'm here to talk to you about a little bit about the nonprofit sector and what we're dealing with right now in this time of COVID-19, and talk about some specific things some kind of thought leaders have come up with, some ideas and some specific action steps that you can take to help your agency move forward during this time. So some housekeeping before we get started. If you're calling in by phone to this webinar, if you have any questions during the webinar, if you could email your questions to Katie at capitalcfollc.com. That's Katie at capitalcfollc.com. And if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please reach out to Katie via the chat box. She's going to be watching that chat box throughout the webinar. And I also wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to you all after the webinar. And then please, if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please at any time put them in the chat box. And as I said, Katie's going to be monitoring the chat box. We'll try to get to all your questions, and anything we're not able to address, we'll follow up with you directly after the webinar. And I just wanted to tell you briefly a little bit about Capital CFO, the host of this webinar. We are an organization that outsources bookkeeping and chief financial officers to small to medium-sized businesses and nonprofits. And we also have specific consulting services and other services for nonprofits. So if you are interested, we can certainly talk to you about that. One of the things that we do for our nonprofit clients is research and monitor best practices and see what thought leaders in the sector are doing. And we curate those things for our nonprofit clients, because we know that as executive leaders, board members, or staff in nonprofits, you don't have time always to do that kind of research on best practices and pull those ideas into your organization. So that's one of the things that we do. And that's what I'll be doing for you today. We've pulled some things together that I hope will give you some real specific ideas and action steps that you can take. So before we start, I just really want to center us and remind you that the work that you are doing is vital and important, and really is one of the things that is really vital to our communities. And particularly now, the nonprofit sector really is vital. So I'm glad that you're here and that you're working toward strength and sustainability for your organizations. Here's a quote from one of my favorite nonprofit gurus, Joan Gary. And she says, "Our nonprofits must survive so the least fortunate among us can recover from this pandemic. Even if your cause seems less relevant now, maybe you run an animal shelter or a chamber orchestra, your organizations will be even more important as society again begins to function and people seek out love, communion, and beauty in the world." So even if you're not doing what we call those frontline crisis services right now that are top of mind for most in the media and for most people, they're kind of getting food to people or medical help or housing, those kind of things, what you do is still very critical and vital. And here's a quote from Deb Clark from the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. And she says it more succinctly, but I think just as powerfully. "If we end up after this is over with no arts organizations and no environmental organizations and no after school programs for kids, it's going to be really awful." So thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you do. So I want to start with kind of looking at the national picture of the nonprofit, the state of the nonprofit sector right now. The Nonprofit Finance Fund asked this question to nonprofits nationally: how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your organization? And this is what they found. Nonprofits are facing challenges with staff and volunteer availability, unable to provide essential services. There's a lot of canceled revenue generating programming, and I'm sure a lot of this is reflecting what you're feeling as well. Destabilizing conditions. We know that in the best of times, nonprofits often operate on shoestring budgets. with overworked and staff that's stretched thin, and those conditions are exacerbated now. There's lots of significant changes in demand for services for nonprofits and reduced government, private, and earned funding streams. And you'll see up in this box, the red box, they also found that 1/3 of nonprofits who responded to this survey had less than 1 month of cash before this crisis. And this was done about a month ago, so now we're 2 months into this. And they also found that 2/3 of nonprofits indicated they were facing crisis just weeks into this. So that's kind of the national picture. And then bring it down now to the state level. In New York State, the New York Council of Nonprofits also did a survey of nonprofits in the state, and they found that here in New York, 81% of nonprofits responding to this survey have had to cancel fundraising events. Not surprising. 88% of organizations reported disruption of service delivery or programming. Big impact. 56% reported decreased staff and volunteer availability. 70% are having funding, budgetary, or cash flow challenges. And 24% have faced an increased demand for services. So a lot of what's happening in the state reflects that picture that is happening nationally as well. So now I want to hear from you. Let's bring it down even closer to your agencies. What is your most immediate concern? We've got a poll for you. If from this list you could pick what is your most immediate concern. I know a lot of them are probably concerns for you, but please pick your most immediate concern. And then if there's one that is your most immediate concern that's not on this list, if you could just enter it in the chat box. A lot of fundraising events canceled, it looks like. Lost revenue. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And we'll share the results with you. Looks like most people, the biggest concern is fundraising events that you have had to cancel. Completely understandable. That's a big loss of revenue. Katie, anything in the chat box?
Nothing in the chat box right now.
Okay. So fundraising events canceled. And we're going to touch on that briefly when we talk about reframing our messaging. Later in the webinar, and I think we'll have some things that we'll touch on. These are the two, also losing revenue streams and unable to deliver programs and services. Okay. So everything that we're feeling here locally in our agencies is also reflected at the state level and the national level as well. So you're not alone. All right, so we're going to talk about 3 things today. Number 1, assessing your financial position and then evaluating your programming based on your financial position and something called the dual bottom line. We'll talk about adapting your programming for the current situation that we're in, and then also reframing messaging, because messaging is still really important, and I would say it's even more important now. And we'll talk specifically about talking to funders and to your community. So the first thing, assessing your financial position and then also assessing your programming with what we call the dual bottom line. So I'm going to talk really quickly about cash flow projections. Some of you may have been at a webinar last week that Sabrina did on financial documents, and one of the things she talked about was cash flow projection. I'm going to do a really condensed version of that, excuse me. And this is the only financial document that we're going to talk about today. But cash flow is really really helpful, and it will show you, it gives you a good picture of how long is your runway? How long do you have before you reach crisis point with your cash flow when hard decisions really need to be made? So a cash flow just tells you month to month how much cash you expect to get in to your agency and how much you will expect to go out of your bank account. This doesn't count invoicing and revenue or checks that may not have been cashed and that kind of thing. This is just literally cash in and cash out. So how you do that, I would recommend that you do a cash flow projection at least through September, and that will give you a really good picture of where you'll be in the fall. You start with your beginning of month cash, and they're going to be real numbers for April because April's already closed out, right? We're in May. So this is just the beginning bank balance that you had in April, cash that came in during the month, And so that gives you your total cash available, simple math, and then you list all your expenses. And your rows over here, your categories may be different than are here. You can certainly add or collapse any of these categories. So this is all the expenses that went out. And then again, it's simple math. Here's the cash that went out. You just subtract it from the cash you had available. And this is the number, end of month cash, that goes up to the top of May. And then the rest of these numbers are going to be estimates. They're going to be educated estimates, best guess estimates based on historical data. You can use bank statements from last year or the year to date to tell you, to give you really good information on what your expenses might be. And you're going to do that for each month through September. And you can see for this example agency that we used, this is when they run out of money. This is when their cash balance in their checking account goes into the negative. So August. This is uncomfortable information to have, but it's good information to have now in May rather than learning this in July or at the beginning of August. So you can begin to make choices and decisions now based on your knowledge that August is the month where things are going to get really difficult. So that's cash flow projection. We'll give you this template. We'll send this out to you after the webinar so that you can do it for your agency. So once you know this, once you have this information, there is a real, when you find out that you are going to run out of cash, the first impulse or the first thing that many people go to is to make some kind of across the board cuts. For example, if you know that you're going to have a 20% reduction in revenue, you might have the impulse to, I mean, it makes logical sense on the face of it to make 20% cuts across the board. And I would submit to you that making these kind of across the board cuts really do significantly more damage to your impact as an organization. They do greater than 20% damage to your impact. So we're going to show you a different way to do that than to make kind of across the board cuts. The second impulse, when you start talking about making cuts, is that people, whether it's staff or board or funders, start to advocate for their favorite programs. They start to advocate for programs based on feeling or emotion in their investment rather than what might make the most strategic sense. And oftentimes the programs that remain in times of financial austerity are those that have the loudest advocates, not necessarily the most strategic, the ones that make the most strategic sense. So we're going to show you a different way to make those decisions. And it's called the dual bottom line. And this dual bottom line is going to help you, based on real information, help you make strategic decisions about which programs or services have the most value today. We know that everything your agency does has value. That goes without saying, but I will say it. Everything your agency does has value, but which programs or services have the most value for today? So this concept called the dual bottom line will help you make those decisions. Most of the time, when we hear the words bottom line, we think about finance, your financial bottom line. Well, the dual bottom line also takes into account mission impact of your programs, not just the finances of your programs or your agency, but also the mission impact. So it's using these two things together that will help you make really good strategic decisions about where's the best use of your resources. So the dual bottom line has 5 steps to it. First, you define your programs, then you will assess their relative impact, determine their profitability or the financial investment that you have, plot your map. You're going to have a matrix map after you have this information. And then from that map, you can determine your strategic imperatives. You can make decisions based on this information. And once you do all these steps, your programs are going to fall into this nice kind of graphic grid here. And again, you will get all this information, instructions, and all the information on how to calculate this dual bottom line after the webinar. So let's walk through this. So the first thing, you define your programs. And programs are anything that your organization supports with staff time and or money. And most of the time, generally speaking, programs fall into 2 categories. Programs that fulfill your mission, this is your service delivery programs, and then programs that are for your fund development programs. So those are the two categories. So you're just going to list those out. What are all your programs, your service delivery programs, and all your fund development programs? And then you will choose 4 or 5 criteria to measure those programs against. I personally like these 4 over here. Does this program contribute to impact, or what is the contribution to impact? How well do we do it? How well do we execute this program? Does it fill significant unmet need? And what is the depth of reach of this program? You can choose different criteria, but I find these 4 are very useful. So once you have all your programs, and here's a example agency that we've created. It's an environmental education agency. So here's your programs down here listed, and then here are the criteria, those 4 criteria. How much does it contribute to impact? How good are we at executing, etc. And then you just rate each of your programs on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. So for example, in their environmental education program, big impact on the mission. They're really good at executing it. Yeah, it meets a significant need, but it doesn't necessarily serve as broad an audience as they would hope. So they've scored each one across here. You can have staff do this individually and then put the scores together. You could do it as a group. If you're a really large agency, it might be you and senior staff that does it. If you're a small agency, then everybody can get in on it. So you rate all the programs across here, and then to get the final score here, it's simple math. You just add these 4 together and then divide by 4 to get the average. So each one of your programs, here's the service delivery programs, and then the fund development programs are at the bottom. Everybody gets a score. Okay, pretty straightforward. That's your mission impact score part of the dual bottom line. And then you look at the finance, and you just assess for each program whether it generates revenue in the end, if you have generate a surplus, or if you're subsidizing that program. So that takes specific program costs, shared costs, and administrative costs of each program, and then minus the expenses, revenue minus expenses for each program, and that's going to give you a plus or minus dollar amount. Okay. And then you will get an Excel sheet that we will send you where you put in all these numbers, and it makes this nice little bubble map of your programs. The blue ones are the mission programs, service delivery, and the green ones are the fund development programs. And you can see that they fall within this 4-quadrant grid. Here's the profitability line, and here's the impact line. So here's that environmental education that we looked at on the table. It's got high mission impact, and it also brings in some revenue to the agency. Maybe schools pay to have kids' classrooms come and do this environmental education, or they pay to have educators come into the classroom, okay? And then looking at this grid, this is the grid. Anything that's up here in this upper right-hand quadrant, high mission impact, high profitability, those you definitely want to keep. All right, these are your stars. And then over here, you have some programs that are high mission impact. They make a big impact, but they maybe are subsidized. They don't bring in revenue. They're heavily subsidized. These are also high impact, and you want to consider how you can nurture those and keep those as well. Down here in the lower right, this is all your fund development stuff. This is the money tree. This is what feeds these up here. And then if you've got any programs that are down in the lower left, low mission impact and low profitability, or they're heavily subsidized, this is where you want to consider the question, are our resources best spent here, or should we take these resources and move them maybe up to these 2 quadrants? All right, so this gives you a framework for discussion and to make some strategic decisions about programming that are not based on emotion or kind of cutting across the board, everything. Now, as I said, we are going to send you all the information. There's instructions and an Excel sheet. And I do want to mention that this dual bottom line concept was developed by Steve Zimmerman. He wrote a book about it 5 or 6 years ago. So it's not a brand new idea, but we think it's a really useful tool and a really powerful way to, as I said, make strategic decisions, particularly in difficult times like these. So you will get all this information. And some of you, when you get this Excel sheet and the pages of instructions, will be really jazzed. This will give you something concrete that you can do. and you really enjoy filling in the Excel sheets and everything. And then there are some of you I know here who, when you hear the word Excel sheet and instructions, will feel like this. And I feel you, I'm in that camp. So we wanted to make this tool and this concept of the dual bottom line accessible to everyone, as many people as possible. So we've come up with a way to do this dual bottom line without filling in Excel sheets. So let me show you that really quickly, and we'll send you information on how to do this as well. It's the same steps: define your programs, assess their impact, etc. And you'll still come up with your programs nicely on the grid here, but it's a quick method. So you'll do the same table with your programs, list them out, evaluate them with this criteria. And then instead of doing the revenue and expense part, you are just going to evaluate. You're going to give each program or event a score between 3 as the highest, -3 as the lowest in terms of profitability. If something brings in some money for you, you'll give it a 1. If it's your biggest money maker, for example, in your agency, give it a 3, and then so on. If it's subsidized, heavily subsidized, or you lose money on it, you'll give it a negative. And then you can take this, we'll give you this grid, has nothing to do with Excel, and then plot your programs. You can take a magic marker or your little sticky dots. You can do this on chart paper with a group, a flip chart, and then you put in your programs. And you can see it's not as elegant. The circles aren't as great as the nice Excel bubble sheet, but it's still vital information. And is it pretty? Not as much, but can you still use it to make strategic decisions? Yes, because you still have your programs in the grids here, right? So again, we'll give you this information. So that's the dual bottom line. It will allow you to assess your programming based on both mission impact and financial bottom line. So I'm going to pause here. That was a lot of information fairly quickly. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer them.
None yet, Liz.
Okay, all right, I'm going to move on then. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today was adapting programming for the current situation. So when for my agency, when the stay-at-home, when schools went to remote learning and stay-at-home first started, my little agency that I'm executive director of works with kids that live in affordable housing, low-income housing in southwestern New Hampshire, and our whole service delivery model is to connect kids to activities and opportunities in the community. We remove the barriers to participation for them. And when schools went to remote learning and stay-at-home orders started, all the community activities stopped. So there was nothing for me to connect kids to. Everybody was at home. So my first impulse was, we can't do anything. We're done. We're just going to have to wait. I hit the pause button. And it was a board member. I was at a development committee meeting maybe 2 weeks into this stay at home. And one of my board members said, we can't hit pause. The kids, if it was difficult for our kids before this happened, it's even more so now. So we can't hit pause. And he was right. So I had to reevaluate and decide, well, I can't do what I was doing. We just can't do what we were doing in January or February for the last 5 years. We can't do that. What can we do? Change is difficult, but not changing is fatal. So we came up with 2 things that we could do, and we are doing. We are doing video, Zoom, schoolwork help, because remote learning is hard. Kids are at home, parents are overworked and stressed. So we've got community volunteers. We set up Zoom meetings and they're helping kids with their schoolwork. It's been great. We've had a really great community response. Volunteers step forward immediately, and the kids are getting real and meaningful help. And then the other thing we're doing is, we're calling it the Kids Connectivity Project. We're trying to see, we're trying to ensure that everyone has a stable internet connection and has a device that they can do their schoolwork on, because the internet has become the connection. Before, we were connecting kids physically with things, and now we need to make sure that they can connect over the internet with things, because that everything's on the internet. So those are the two things we're doing. Never would have done this before. Didn't have to. Our mission, our service delivery was different. So this has become our service delivery for now. So some other ways that organizations are pivoting or adapting their programming. Here's SPAC's website. Of course, they can't do their service delivery the way that they usually have by having concerts and performances. So they've gone online. They've got a virtual learning library and then some other activities online. Here's a small theater arts organization that does theater and dance classes for kids. They're live streaming all their classes now. And then here's an organization, I pulled them because that's the Children's Literacy Foundation, and they normally, in normal times, have authors go and speak to groups of kids and then give books to kids who come to these presentations at schools, libraries, camps, and that kind of thing. They can't do that now. So they've figured out another way to get books to children. They're doing library grab bags, book and meal delivery, and then they're sending books home to children with incarcerated parents. So they've had to pivot as well. So the concept is, think of how you can serve your constituency now in a different way than you might have had to, or been doing it in January or February. So if there's anybody attending who can tell us how you have pivoted or how you've adapted your programming, it would be really great if you could share it with us in the chat box or raise your hand and Katie will unmute you. I think one of the things that we're missing, that we have missed as a nonprofit sector, is the ability to get together with colleagues and others in our field and just talk about what are the best practices, what's worked for you, what might work for me, and to kind of share ideas and best practices with one another. So I'd love it if anyone has anything that they can share with how they've adapted their programming.
We have a couple that have shared already.
Okay.
Bethany indicated we have been presenting children's cultural programming videos online.
Great.
And Jen
Nice.
said, hopefully other members of the Zonta Club of Glens Falls are on the webinar as well, which they are. I know from registering them. I love the 4-quadrant matrix as a way to determine strategic goals moving forward. I think orgs are or need to realize that they cannot be all things, all people, but should focus on high impact projects. That is definitely the case with Glens Falls Hospital and should be the case with Zonta moving forward as well.
Yep. Thank you. I think that's right. That's a really great insight. And that's exactly what that dual bottom line is designed to allow you to do. And,
right. And that's an easy way to get you to that, you know, the high impact projects.
Yes.
Good point.
Absolutely.
And then Emily indicated Wood Theater in Glens Falls here. We just hosted a virtual talent show on YouTube as a fundraiser. Had folks send videos that our audience could vote on.
Nice.
That's a neat idea and a great way to pivot.
Yeah, I love that.
April indicated our day program services have been suspended in person, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Our staff are trying to maintain connections by using FaceTime and Zoom. Some staff are running essential errands for those that live in the community. So
wonderful.
yeah, that's a great way to use your staff in different ways, but still meeting a need.
Yeah, that's great. And that highlights that what we said at the beginning, the nonprofit sector really is vital to communities. They fill gaps that government agencies don't necessarily fill, and it brings the community together. That's great. Thank you very much.
Liz, can I just interrupt real quick?
Yes.
I think what Liz presented is so accurate, because I think as nonprofit leaders, we have two impulses when something like this happens. And one is exactly what Liz said, that we want to hit pause and just be like, let's ride this out. But it's not a 2-week stint, obviously. So once you kind of get over that 2-week hump, you have to make really strategic decisions that aren't just based on your heart and what you love. And the second is exactly what some of our attendees was talking about, which is, well, we have to be everything to everybody then, and we have to protect every single one of our clients in all the ways possible. And one thing that we all as leaders try very hard not to do in our nonprofits is do what, we tend to call mission creep a little bit. So sticking to who you are, but pivoting and making strategic decisions that aren't just based on your heart, but aren't just based on finances either, is really what that dual bottom line allows you to do. So I really want to thank you for putting that together, because it allows both of those things to not happen.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, great. And then that brings us to our the final piece that we're going to talk about today, and that's reframing messaging. What does that mean? Well, to begin with, as with all communication, it's all about relationships, right? Everything your organization does is about relationships, whether it's relationships with your constituents, the people you serve, the community, your donors, board, internally, there's all kinds of relationships. And during challenges, and this is an extreme challenge, the time that we're in, leaders need to keep your stakeholders close, and the ability of your organization to recover once the clouds lift will be directly tied to how well you do this. So it's really important. Again, your organization has a myriad of relationships, major funders, corporations with your community, your internal team, your board of directors, small donors, community supporters, and then the constituents that you work with. So I'm going to do another really quick poll here. If you could tell me which groups you have crafted communication and messaging for specifically during this pandemic. And on this particular poll, you can choose as many of these as you want. And if there's another group that's not listed in the poll here, if you could put that in the chat box, that would be great. And Katie's going to pull the poll up shortly. There it goes. So which groups have you crafted communication and messaging for during the pandemic? Choose as many as are appropriate. And then if there's anybody that we missed on the list, you can enter it in the chat box. Oh, good, you're communicating. That's great. Lots of groups. Okay, I'm going to close that. Great, thanks, Katie. So you're doing a lot of communicating. That's really great. Board, very important. Staff, major donors, wonderful. Great. So let's talk a little bit about kind of specifics about how you can kind of reframe the same way a lot of you have already pivoted your programming. I think it's really important to try and reframe your messaging a little bit during this time. So I'll talk a little bit about community first, and oftentimes the community message kind of overlaps with your donor message as well, because many people in the community are your donors as well. So I think it's really important right now to emphasize to the community what you really want to get across is we're here, we're still here. Thank you for your past support, and what we are doing matters, right? And those messages were the same BC, before Corona, but they're reframed a little bit. So here's some examples. This is a newsletter, how our kids are keeping busy this spring. And this also reminds the community of who you're serving. Right? This is from that little theater arts organization that I mentioned previously. This is from their website. They've got pictures back in the time when kids could do performances and their community could come watch. And then they've got all kinds of quotes from the community thanking them for the online streaming of classes that they have been doing since the stay-at-home orders started. And this does two things. It pulls the stakeholders closer, the people who have commented, and thank them. It shows that their input is valued and their thanks are recognized and valued. And it also lets the larger community know that this organization is still involved and still serving the community. And then here's another newsletter that just shows kids doing what this organization provides. And then here's some more. Here's a little theater in Vermont that has put all of their archived videos of performances back into the 80s, I think, looks like 1982, are now online and accessible for everyone. So even though they can't go to theater performances right now, they can enjoy the performances that this theater has put on in the past. Here's a newsletter from a local or a regional arts advocacy organization, thanking the community for their support and reminding people of the importance of the arts. And I think that's one thing for me personally during this stay-at-home period has made me recognize that the arts is vital. The arts is vital. Everywhere you go, there's music online, people are performing online, dance, music, and art is all over the place, lifting us up and reminding us what it means to be human. So if you're an arts organization, I think you've got a message that really resonates with folks right now. And here's something from the Albany Symphony Orchestra. I think this is their maestro, their conductor. He's dressed up as Beethoven. So they're putting a bunch of really fun videos online for folks. So again, you're reminding the community, we are an important part of the community. We thank you for your support. And this is what we have to offer. And then here's some more that I think are really important. And the message here in this is what we're doing now, even though it might be different than what we did in January or February before this happened. We are still doing stuff. We are still doing our thing, fulfilling our mission for the community. So I brought back this Children's Literacy Foundation that I showed you before about what they're doing, the grab bags and stuff, because the executive director told the community or messaged this out to the community in an op-ed for the local newspaper. So that's one avenue that you could use. All right. And then here's a website for YMCA, what we're doing to help now, talking about what the Y is doing now. They can't have people in to do weightlifting or exercise classes or take swim lessons, but this is what they're doing for the community now. We're not waiting. We're doing stuff now. And then here is a local youth choir, again, from their website, just telling what they're doing now, how they're staying true to their mission and fulfilling their mission now. So all really important messages. And then the other group or the other community that you need to talk to are your current funders, your large grantors, corporate sponsors or foundation supporters. A couple of things that you can do. You can ask that restricted funding become unrestricted. You may have received a grant or funding for a particular program, and maybe that's one of the programs that once you do that grid for the dual bottom line, you realize that that program is not the best use of your resources. Funders understand there's a lot of talk in the philanthropic community right now about the challenges that nonprofits are facing, and a lot of them are being really flexible in response to this. So please talk to your current funders and ask them for help. Again, ask that restricted funding become unrestricted and tell them what you need. I'm in a group online, a nonprofit ED group, and I just pulled some of the things from that group that are examples of what happened when you do talk to your funders. Here's one. Talk to a grantor and received more than they had asked for. Some people have been really gratified at the response from foundations. This particular person got a grant without asking to complete without having to complete an application. Again, funders are being a lot more flexible now. And then a current funder that they had added a 4th year to their 3rd year grant funding. And here's an example of getting restricted funds changed to unrestricted. And then this ED did some check-in calls with major donors just to see how they were doing, and did not make an ask, but just checked in to see how they were doing. Again, it's all about relationships, and this is one of the things that this ED did to engage her stakeholders, and got some money as a happy result of that. Other options, financial advisors are good allies to cultivate. They can help donors with planned giving and contributions to your organization that are beneficial to both your donor and to your organization. You may have a board member, for example, who's in the finance field or is a financial advisor. If you don't currently work with a financial advisor, we at Capital CFO do have a lot of partners who are financial advisors, and we can connect you with someone. All right, so that's a little bit about reframing your messaging to the community and to your stakeholders. Does anyone, I wonder, again, I'd like to open it up and see if there's anyone who would like to share some of the ways that they have changed their messaging to your stakeholders, your community, or your funders. And I appreciate you all sharing what you have done.
Nothing yet.
Okay, I'm going to move on because I don't. I want to be mindful that we're getting towards the end of the hour. So the next thing, fundraising moving forward. All right, this is critical. Fundraising obviously has always been critical for all of us in the nonprofit sector, but it's more critical now, particularly with the hits that our fund development has taken because of this COVID-19. So closing your doors along with the critical services you provide will compound the crisis for many. So don't be afraid to continue fundraising. You need to. So there are a couple things here. I think that early on, things like this particular post on a website might have been effective. I think people have somewhat of crisis fatigue now, and there's two things happening. They are kind of wistful or nostalgic about the community that we used to have, that community feeling and the things that we used to be able to do before this. And they want to be hopeful about the future and be able to know that there's a possibility of getting back to a time when we will be able to gather again and do the things that we used to do before this. So, and this is from a website. This I don't think is particularly effective now. Again, a month ago or 6 weeks ago, it may have been. I don't think this is particularly effective messaging now. And I also think that there's a middle ground between this crisis, just a red button asking for crisis support. And this here, which I think is an example, this is from Giving Tuesday, which was moved up from November to May this year. And this has no mention of our current situation, right? So there's a middle ground here between crisis and everything's the same as it was. Because from this here, you know, I don't know when these girls will ever be able to get together and build picnic tables again. So I don't know what they're asking for here, except to give as usual. So here's some examples that I think are more effective in reframing messaging. And these are large organizations. This is Meals on Wheels, and their messaging is, when homebound and alone is a way of life. This is because so this really resonates. So it builds on and resonates with the current situation without that just the crisis banner message. And then here's another one. This is First Books, which is an organization that provides low-cost books to libraries and schools and other organizations. Books don't immediately come to mind when we think of the first, response necessities, but they've reframed it. They've framed it in, that we're looking for the future, looking to the future. Again, it points to that hopeful time. There is hope for the future. And then underneath here, when your family has to choose between books and your next meal and your school is closed due to COVID-19, hope fades. So we want to give hope back to children and to us as well. So that's why this resonates. It hits those buttons. And then for NPR, in uncertain times, your support keeps us going. So there's a recognition of what's happening now, uncertain, okay, uncertain, unsettling, not crisis. And this also resonates because this tells me, and I know this, I think intuitively, that this is not a sprint. It's, as Sabrina just mentioned, it's not going to be, it's not over in 2 weeks. We're in this for the long haul. And so this kind of brings to mind for me running a marathon and the people cheering on the sidelines and the runners say it's your support that kept me going through the long haul. So I think these 3 messages really resonate, and they're well done and reframed for the current time that we're in. And then some more. Here's the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Of course, no one's visiting the aquarium now, but they're still committed to animal care, and they need our support, being very frank and open about it. The staff are still bravely taking care of the animals, and without ticket sales to cover the cost, the aquarium needs our support. Here's Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Normally their messaging is all framed around helping children reach their potential, and they have changed it a little bit, say we're stepping up and continue connecting and supporting, keeping children connected and supported during this time of social distancing, school closing, and stress related to the coronavirus crisis. And this resonates because we all are experiencing that as well. Any parent who is working from home, trying to help their kids with school work remotely, understands all of this. So that really resonates as well. Lets us know what they're doing now to help kids and how we can help them. And then here's the little doggies. They need us and we need you, and your gift helps so much at this uncertain time. This word, again, as you can see, a lot of people are using this now, and that's, I think that's the word that has become kind of resonant for this period, rather than crisis, just in terms of reframing messaging. And then this ad I really like, or this messaging I really like because it hits, we've got be safe, be kind, be hopeful. So we've got the community feel of being safe and being kind. Be safe, speaks to our current situation, and be hopeful. That's looking forward to a time when things will be better. And then over here, now more than ever, we are called to make a difference. So it references our current situation. It references our sense of community, our need for community, and hope for the future. It's all kind of tied into one. So I think this is a really powerful message. Well done reframing for this Performing Arts Center. So again, if anyone would like to share how you have reframed your messaging, I think it's really helpful because we are all here together right now at this moment, and we don't often get a chance to do that. If anyone can share how they have reframed their messaging for their organization, I'd love to hear it. And you can.
Nothing just yet, but we'll see if anyone throws anything into the chat box.
Okay, you continue to do that. Put it, if something, if you think of something you would like to share, please do put it in the chat box, and I will keep moving. So after the webinar, later today or tomorrow when we get the recording finished up, we will be sending you these tools and takeaways. We'll send you the cash flow template, some really nice messaging examples from the Frameworks Institute on how to talk about the nonprofit sector and what we're doing in the community now during this time. And then the dual bottom line matrix map instructions and Excel sheets, both the Excel version and the non-Excel version. And I'll just leave this up for just a minute. I also wanted to let you all know that we are doing another webinar on May 28th at 9:30 in the morning, specifically about fundraising and virtual fundraising in the present time, because a lot of things, obviously, for obvious reasons, have had to go online. So that may be helpful to you as well. And we'll send out information in our follow-up from this webinar to you. So any final questions before we let you go?
Nothing so far in the chat box.
Okay.
Liz, I want to thank you for your time today. This was great. You did a great job.
Thanks everybody for being here. And again, we will send you the recording of the webinar. And if you have any questions after we get off, here's my contact information. I'm always happy to answer questions, act as thought partner for you, and more information about the nonprofit services we offer. Here's our Capital CFO website. And thanks so much for being with us today. And if there's no final questions, then I'll stay on for maybe one more minute to see if there's any final questions. And if not, thanks so much. And we'll send out all our tools and the recording to you afterward.
So we do have one comment.
Okay.
Lorraine indicated Santa is just starting to think about reframing. Wondering about the Donate Now button application. So I think what Lorraine is talking about is having a Donate Now button on your website. Is that right, Lorraine? And we can also unmute you if you'd like to chat. Lorraine, you are able to talk right now if you'd like.
Yeah, we have, just started to get more information about fundraising moving forward, connecting members to a Reframe message. This has been a great opportunity. We do not currently have a Donate Now button attached to our website.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming there are, ways to figure out how to do that. I like the reframing message that would be connected to not business as usual, which we are doing. So I think what I'm asking is the financial piece behind that, which I'm assuming is an account of some sort that you connect to.
Yes.
Donate Now, and that can be done virtually, I'm assuming, with your information. Just wondering how effective that is, and if other people have found that it makes a difference, and if you direct people to your website, if that is something that we might consider a way of raising funds without an actual fundraiser.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's always a good idea to have a Donate Now button on your website, no matter what. And there are lots of different options to do that. You can, I don't know who manages your website, your website platform is, but it's, there's lots of different ways to do that. And we could, I'm happy to maybe connect with you after the webinar at some point and talk more specifically about your website and how you might be able to do that. But my organization's website certainly has a Donate Now button, and it's connected to our donation platform, happens to be called GiveGab. There's all kinds of other, Stripe is another donation platform. I think you can do it through PayPal as well. There's all kinds of different platforms, and there's different costs associated with that. But yeah, we can talk more about that and see how it might be best for you to do that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And we do have another comment to that end. Mark, I would also encourage you to open a brokerage account in addition to a cash account so that you can accept non-cash donations, stock, mutual funds, etc. So that's kind of the next level beyond the Donate Now button and accepting cash is how you can open yourselves up to more options for donations in the short term and long term.
Yeah. This is a little bit about what Liz was talking about with partnering with a financial advisor, because they would be able to assist you with this Mark happens to be one of our partners too, but this will really allow you to talk to people because it's a win-win for the donor, for their tax credit, as well as for you. So it's a really easy way to kind of get connected. So if you want more information about that, we'd be happy to connect you with our partners around financial planning. Thank you, Mark.
And then we just have another comment. Jen, kudos to the Wood Theater for replicating a fundraiser online. It is definitely something we can all learn from. They took the opportunity to do something that highlighted their mission and raise money even during these challenging times. Perfect example of pivoting in a creative way. Hope it was a successful fundraiser. To which Emily responded, thank you so much, Jen. It was a lot of fun and a great way to provide our audience with some entertainment, give performers a stage, and raise some money. And I agree. It's
Absolutely.
example of pivoting, you know, not to, Liz, to your point, not just hitting the pause button and saying, okay, we can't do anything, but finding a way to bring that fundraiser to life in a different way.
Yep. Perfect.
And again, we are going to be hosting a webinar to talk a little bit through some of what other nonprofits are doing to fundraise during this time. Both individually and, you know, across the board, and doing kind of non-events or virtual events. So we'll definitely talk a lot more about that, but that is a great example.
Absolutely. And that's all the comments we have right now.
Okay. And it's just exactly 11:30. So.
It is. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Liz, for all of this information. We will be sharing it with all of you. If you guys do have questions that you do want to ask that you didn't want to ask to the whole group, please feel free to get in touch with us. All three of us have run or are running nonprofits currently, so we are here to help for sure.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.